23 past the hour, Israel continues to prepare its ground assault in Rafah, despite President Biden pressuring the country to scale back its forces there. Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel is prepared to act with or without U.S. aid.
אם נצטרך לעמוד לבד, נעמוד לבד. אמרתי כבר שאם צריך נילחם בציפורניים, אבל יש לנו הרבה יותר מאשר ציפורניים.
Joining us now from Jerusalem, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, always a pleasure to see you. So what's happening right now vis-a-vis Rafah?
So I think you can't separate what's happening in Rafah and what's happening with the overall negotiations. So on the ground in Rafah, the Israeli positions are more or less fixed. They have taken over the Rafah border crossing, the Palestinian side, the Gazan side of that border crossing, and they have been carrying out attacks around that area, using their positions to carry out what have been described as limited attacks, precision strikes, and our crew in Gaza has been documenting some of that. The fact that they are holding the border crossing has made life almost unbearable for the people who are in Rafah, and we're talking about 1 million to 1.5 million people, many of them who've been displaced numerous times from the north to the south. But so far, Israeli troops have not crossed over what's known as the Salah ad-Din road, the main road that runs from the north and to the south inside the Gaza Strip, and entered the most densely populated part of Rafah. It seems that they're using this as a pressure tactic to try and extract more concessions from Hamas. Because let's not forget, Jose, just a few days ago, Hamas offered publicly, which was a surprise tactic, to release all of the hostages that it's holding, all of the Israelis, all of the foreigners, in exchange for a list of concessions. It caught Israel by surprise. Israel said that the concessions that Hamas was asking for were too much. And at the same time, it moved into Rafah. So it seems that this is a way for Israel to put pressure on Hamas, put pressure on the negotiators, and also put pressure physically on the Hamas fighters, because according to the Israeli government, there are still 4 battalions of Hamas militants located in the Rafah area. But for the people who are in Rafah and the hostages, it is even more pressure on them after a situation, months of an unbearable situation.
And I know, Richard, that you've been speaking to families of hostages as well as to folks inside Rafah and you know, throughout the Gaza Strip. The statement by Hamas earlier this week was, I believe it was to release 34 hostages. There were more than 130 hostages still in Hamas hands, as far as we all know, because of what happened after the October 7th massacre. What's the discrepancy in the numbers there?
The Hamas state was actually to release all of them. The 33 were supposed to come in the first stage. It was described as a 3-phase deal, with 33 coming out in the first tranche, the rest coming out in the second, and then the third being a reconstruction phase. But the Israelis and the Palestinians have been fighting both privately in the negotiating teams and publicly through statements about what exactly this document says and what it should say. The Israelis were complaining that the mention of this 33 was insufficient. Was that all? What about the rest? The Hamas had been talking about if it didn't have enough live hostages, it might supplement bodies to arrive at that 33 number. But generally, when looked at as a whole, no, the offer was to free all of the hostages in exchange for a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, which is also something that Israel says it is not willing to do because it wants to maintain a security presence there. So the two sides were, earlier this week, perhaps the closest they've ever been to reaching an agreement, because Hamas had never said that it was willing to release all of the hostages and spelled out terms. Even some American negotiators privately thought that this was something of an encouraging sign and thought that there was room for discussion, and were therefore annoyed when Israel moved into Rafah. But Israel has moved into Rafah. It says that the force is the only language that Hamas understands, and that it is using this campaign to pressure Hamas, to weaken it militarily, and potentially strengthen its hand at the negotiating table. The negotiations are stalled for now, but they're not over.